Lessons we've learned so far in doing things like that, one would be we have to think differently about people and how they're supported. The concept of safety is different. The concept of community is different. The concept of failure is different. For example, we might have a really highly creative relationship with a family and individual, and all sorts of cool things are happening, and then something happens within the family and it falls apart, like some of our families fall apart. And what we do next is not get more conservative. We don't go, oh, did you see what just happened? Now we got to go back to group homes. What we see is that it happened for that person, but we're not generalizing it. Now we're now kicking in a policy about people in that kind of creative situation. So I think that's a different way of thinking about safety. The old way of thinking, or maybe the legacy way of thinking, is that you get more controlling. You put more controls in place. I caution about that. Doesn't mean we're reckless. We're not reckless at all. So the change begins with you, as I mentioned. If you're going to do this work, because nobody's going to help you. I mean, OPWDD's not helping you with this stuff. They're not making life easy for you. And CMS is giving you the community rules, but they've also given you a whole lot of other crap. So, I mean, nobody's making this easy for you, so you better think about what it means for yourself. It does mean deeply connecting to each other and the people you work with and the families. It means that it's transformational, and I know that's like almost as bad as paradigm transformation, and we'll take a look at that later on, language. But it's deep, and it's deeply within our culture, which means that it's below the surface of awareness, like kind of like iceberg. You just see a little bit of stuff happening up here, and underneath there's some very deep stuff that's there because what's there worked in the past. Shelter workshops worked. Day programs worked. Community residents and ICFs work. But as we are further down the road, they don't work for full inclusion in the community, which we're not even close to yet, but we now begin to see and stretch towards. So those things that work have norms and behaviors attached to them, and they're not direct. You can't get at them directly. They evolve and emerge and percolate, like like when you put a stew together, and let steam it for a while and let it percolate for a while. So then the flavors come out. You don't actually make the flavors come out. You sort of put things together and say, "Gee, I hope that stew comes out okay," because relatives are coming over. Anyway, another one is that, like it or not, those competing commitments aren't going away. The regulations aren't going away. The managed care drumbeat isn't going away. So in a way, you're managing those two agendas. The innovation agenda and creating new and exciting things, and becoming, trying to meet regulation. And that requires you to be ambidextrous. You've got to do both. Now, you can't choose one for the other. I suppose you could just walk out of your organization and figure out how to volunteer somewhere. You can do that. But if you're in this system, you should be ambidextrous. By the way, if you choose control over innovation, you're gonna petrify. So in a way, that's not a great choice, is it? We'll just forget the innovation and we'll just do what they tell us to do. No, it doesn't work that way. There are evolving models of care that we've seen over the years that put us in different places around a number of different dimensions of our world. I'll be talking about that in a second. And, well, that's the second right here. This guy here is Brian. And Brian was, he was driven by his mother and his brother back in the 70s, early 70s, to Rome Developmental Center, and left there. And then, as we know, Rome was a pretty bad place. especially in the 70s, and that he then was moved to O.D. Heck Developmental Center in Schenectady, which was supposed to be this model place. It's still an institution. And then from there, he was then moved to a family care home in Rensselaer County, where I operate out of. And he established perhaps his first nurturing relationship with the family care provider, a woman. He really was turned on by that. He loved it. But unfortunately, she was older, and she got out of the family care business, moved briefly to another family care home in Rensselaer County, and then moved in with a community residence, or now called IRA, in the Arc of Rensselaer County, in which George here was the house manager. And right around that time, they would do some planning with Brian that was pretty typical. And they put him on behavior planning because Brian would act out and run away and do all those kinds of things. And George got turned on, like the rest of us, to some person-centered planning tools and philosophies. And we did one with Brian and discovered that Brian had a vision about white picket fences and cozy little homes. We began to realize that that kind of represented his experience with the family care home. And George began to say, wait a minute here, he doesn't want a group home, he wants a home, right? So at that point, the Arc of Rensselaer County was also doing some journeying, we call it learning journeys, to some places in Vermont and Massachusetts that were doing something called shared living, which was a much more evolved state to foster care or family care, where the family care provider, by the way, it could be benevolent, but nevertheless, it's their place. Here's your room. It's my agenda, my house. Shared living is a different concept. It means that we come together and really figure out life together. I mean, both our homes. So George got turned on to, like a couple of other former staff people, and said to us, I would like to, and Brian is interested in creating a home together. And that's what they did. They are now living together. We provide some Medicaid services. George is on payroll still. But Brian pretty much has a life in the community. Here they're in a particular church, hanging out with some folks that are actually musicians. They play old-timey music together. Brian has a harmonica and some percussion. George has his guitar. And they are doing stuff together and separately in the community. They're not, he doesn't identify himself anymore as being a client of the Arc of Rensselaer County. So if you look at his trajectory, I think it parallels the major forms of support and services that we have seen over the course of the last 60 years. Actually, it answers the question 4 times on how to support a person with a developmental disability. What's the best form of our service and our best form of our relationship together? So, here's what I think they are. I think there's something called institutional care. Brian was at Rome. I mean, that's like the central, when we're really in it dominantly, institutional care is in an institution. Rome, O.D. Heck. But interestingly enough, the sensibility, the aspects of the interaction and the service in institutions can be transferred into community settings as well. The headset, the assumptions that we have when we're operating something like that. So it doesn't mean that institutional care doesn't necessarily lodge in just one of those big institutions. The next thing, and usually what happens, is that there's some problem that's happening. A particular way of supporting a person in that form or care of support or service isn't working anymore. Something is happening and it's falling apart, it's decaying. Now, this happens with organizations all the time. We have these life cycle trajectories that go on, that growth and creation, and then you get normalized, and then you begin to find that you sort of go in a decline state. Now, some organizations are able to regenerate and rejuvenate their organizations through innovation, and so something new comes out on the other end of it. These models of care have that same trajectory. So institutional care begins to decline. Somebody comes up with the concept of, let's pull it out of the institution, put it in the communities, disperse it. Now, whether managed care companies like it or not, we've been doing managed care for a long time. We have service coordinators, we have coordination between units, we have ISPs, we have capped finances and efficiencies. So in a way, we have managed care. It's just that we're doing the managing of care, not a managed care company. So I think you have that. That's the next generation. The third generation is now, you can notice that the language changes. We're moving away from caring for a person to supporting a person. The language is important. It's a reorientation of how the person relates to us in the service. And it calls integrative, which is really my taking back, I think, person-centered planning has been ripped off by the system. Like, example, person-centered planning regs, really? I mean, how does that work? I thought it was supposed to be in contrast to regulation, but now you got a checklist around person-centered planning. So I'm changing the door. I don't care. I'm taking back the sensibility of it. Integrative means that we blend in whole aspects of your life. So all the roles in your life, all those features in your life that are important to you, that makes your life distinct. Being employed, having a relationship that's intimate, volunteering and contributing to community, having a whole lot of fun, leisure, being spiritual. That's integrative. Get you to have a circle around you. This circle is there mostly because the community yet isn't completely there for people with developmental disabilities. So you meet allies and friends and supporters and bridge builders and people who are going to be there to connect you to stuff and be your, again, allies and advocates. So those people are the ones that are a major feature in your life. Different outcomes happen in these particular forms of services. And then finally, the dream, and some people are acting the dream, they're playing it out on a daily basis, but just a few on the margin. These are people who are actually now citizens. We're only in their life in an ancillary way. Just like our doctor isn't like hanging out with us every day, and if we trip on the sidewalk like 20 people and have access to a database on us, and everything that we do has to be first screened through an assessment. I mean, that's what citizenship is about, right? Being free from that kind of control. So, how does this look in cartoon form? So our assumption, it really leads back to what we think about a person with a disability. So, and you think this is not operating still, right? People with disabilities are tragic and vulnerable. Justice Center, right? Isn't the Justice Center based on this premise? I mean, do you know what the title of the jobs are at the Justice Center? Anybody know? Like, I think it's like one of them is kind of like vulnerable person specialist. 1 and 2. What does that mean? 1 and 2, I don't know. But can you imagine having that job title? I specialize in vulnerable people. Anyway, it's still there, it's still in somebody's head. When we have that headset, we create institutions. And we get that kind of outcome. We get personal care, we get the hot, to a certain extent, unless it completely falls apart. We get kind of like this baseline, shelter, food, Maslow's foundational hierarchy, substance. Well, if we think of people as consumers, and we're thinking of people with clinical needs, which is, if you listen, if Jason Helgerson was up here, you'd hear this headset. We coordinate care, because really the central place we meet people with disability, or people in general, and manage care, is through their services, through their medical services. And boy, they ought to be, we don't want to contradict one service from another, so we better coordinate it. We're going to find those efficiencies. And so what do you get out of that? A plan of coordinated care with appropriate levels of service. How nice is that? And customer satisfaction, because we make sure you fill out that customer satisfaction survey. I'm sarcastic. Well, I like this one. People with disabilities have capacities. I mean, we know you do, right? And let's go there first. What's really frustrating is if you go, you better watch out though in terms of ambidextrous. If you go there first, you get a low score, you won't get the money to get your service. That's just a little hint. Just, don't play it out when you're doing the DDP or the CAS system. Remember ambidextrous, right? Make sure you get the money. But in your head, remember that the person has capacities, beliefs. So then we provide person-centered or integrative supports. Oh, look at that. We get those type of outcomes. That's when they align up together. Well, what if we thought they were citizens with rights, human rights? This is a movement that's happening all over the world, by the way. This is what we're seeing in conversation as human rights. If you're CQL certified, I'm sure it's popped up there as well, right? I mean, you see it. How is CQL certified? You guys, anybody in this room? Zoom. Well, they'll nail you on human rights, so I'm warning you. I mean, because that is something that's floating out there. That wasn't a big conversation 10 years ago, but it is now. Because I think we're at that point in the road that we can see, really, we're talking about community here. So community resources is how you respond to a citizen, not a specialized, in particular, all the time specialized service. And hopefully this is what we're looking at in terms of an outcome. So notice how what's in your head leads to design of services, leads to outcomes. So it's kind of interesting when we set up a managed care system and we want to have real outcomes. It's contradictory, because it's really not structured that way. And we wonder why we're confused, I think, because that's where I'm coming from. So I know you can't read this. I apologize. I get the book, so it's in the book. Anyway, when you really get complicated with this thought, you come up with a chart like this. And you listen to me, don't look at the chart. It's going to make your eyes look cross. On the top of the chart are all those different types of care and supports models, major ones. Institutional care, focused on the question of how do you serve a population, right? So we set up these like hospital systems. Like that's what the question was for hospitals. It wasn't like how do you serve that particular individual, it was how do you serve this region of people with these potential issues. And that's the same thing that happened with people with developmental disabilities. It was a question about total population. In many ways, managed care was a question about total population, but how do you design a more efficient system so you're not just generically doing everything? And that's what managed care comes up with. So it's still care, still focused on a total population design. When you get to integrative, we now lodge ourselves in the individual. And with this, and then we spin that in the last model now the individual isn't somebody we're just supporting, it's a citizen that we're supporting, with rights and all sorts of other things happening. So you've got those basic 4 models, and you have 8 critical dimensions, meaning aspects of those models that play out differently depending on the model. So if I have, so one would be an individual-professional relationship. How do you, as a person with developmental disability, relate to the person that's a professional? In institutional care, I'm the expert. You come to me and I diagnose what's going on with you, and I prescribe what's going to happen with you based on my findings. Now, I'm just curious, like a person with developmental disability in our system, would they be approached this way? I mean, pretty much, right? As horrified as I am by stating that, when they come in for a service in the Arkansas County, their first experience is through the front door and getting assessed and getting Medicaid application and getting labeled and getting somebody telling them, well, here's your options, this is what you got to do. I mean, my gosh, right from the get-go. Then there's the experience between the individual and the support they actually receive. So in the institutional model, and in managed care somewhat, they're getting programs. You know? I mean, our life is not a program. That's not, we don't choose among 3-day programs in our life. Our life is not filtered that way. People who are in institutional care are filtered into program experiences. I'm not saying that's wrong, I'm just saying that's descriptively what's going on, where we were at that particular time was a super good solution. Now, we see that citizenship goal out there is not so good anymore, not aligned, not evil, but not aligned. So when you get to managed care, we're going to split that up because supposedly you're going to go through a pathway to get habilitated, supposedly. But the program model sort of surfaces. We now have something called Day Have Without Walls. We call it individualized. But in the Capital District, all the organizations are coming together with an efficient model. They've hired a staff person, they bought a vehicle, and they've located 2 or 3 people that fit into that vehicle. They've got a scheduler back at the ranch that says, on Monday we're going to food bank, on Tuesday we're going to the vet hospital, Thursday we're going to go to the homeless shelter, and so forth and so on, right? So we got pretty exciting. I mean, we get out into the community, we hang out with 3 buddies if we like them, and every week is kind of, we know what to expect. Well, you know, the other day, I was talking to a person at the food bank, and they were pretty excited. Oh, you know, it's really cool. You guys show up on Tuesday, and we got a place right over here where you guys can set up and work and do some volunteer work. You know, and by the way, the Center for Disabled is on Monday, and Living Resource on Wednesday, Wildwood's on Thursday, and Warren Washington ARC is on Friday, in that same table. So we got rotating disability organizations coming through. Now you tell me whether that's integrated or not, and not a program. Now, certainly one step further down the road, but still a program. So part of the question is, how do we develop our awareness to locate where we are in the journey? Are we at the beginning point? Are we at the midpoint? Probably at different points. If you're going to talk to people at the Arkansas County, we are all over the map. We have legacy situations. We've got really, and all the way on the other end of it, we've got people that are operating as citizens. So I suspect all of you are in organizations. If I were to be doing a 3-dayer with you at the Learning Institute, we'd have you mapping out your organization where you're fitting on the journey. Just to sort of, would you want that, right? Like tomorrow, I want to go to Letchworth State Park, not Letchworth Village, the institution, but Letchworth State Park. And I'm going to want to know what the map looks like, and I'm going to know where I'm starting. And where I'm starting from is complete ignorance. I got no idea about how to get there, never been there. So I'm going to want a map about what this is looking like. And they're going to be things that I got to prepare myself for. Like, what do I want to do in Letchworth? Do I want to spend an hour there or 2 hours there? Do I have sneakers that I can wear? Am I going to bushwhack? What am I prepared to do? What am I prepared to risk? Only know it if I know where I'm sort of at in terms of the evolution. There's a bunch of other stuff up there that I'm not going to go through because it's going to take me to next year to figure it out. But there are a bunch of other things that change depending on what orientation we're operating from. Okay? Even leadership changes. So, if we're in this area here, which is integrative supports and community supports, support model, we need managers that can be change managers. Certainly if we're in institutional care, we need to follow the rules, so that's where you're likely to find an authoritarian bureaucrat. But hopefully you don't have an authoritarian bureaucrat over here, which is possible, because this is a linear model. It's, we know that we're at different places in the evolution. Now at some point, my dream is that we help this process to evolve, because we want citizenship and valued roles outcomes for people with developmental disabilities. So I'm hoping that this evolution occurs. But this system, this model, still breathes heavy in our face. I mean, everybody see the movie Labyrinth? Right? And the bog of eternal stench? Remember that? It's kind of like what we're going through with all the regulations. Stenchy little regulations. They're still operating here when we're trying to create blue space. And we're trying to say to the regulators and CMS, give us some blue space. Don't give us more regulation. Hopefully, Steve, I know, is trying to work on that. So, emerging support models reflect our striving for wholeness in our community. That's what so we start with figuring out that we separate people out, right? Got to control the situation, so we'll divide everything up into neat little specialized boxes, and that way we'll be able to control our supports and services. That's the model that was started a number of years ago. I think we get more sophisticated, more emotionally mature when we develop and evolve to wholeness and see diversity as being something wonderful and evolved life stage. So you have this response. We need institutions to care for special populations. We need to coordinate services for needy consumers, the next level of sophistication. And then we need circles to connect persons' unique qualities to community. Notice that things are becoming more open, more inclusive. Finally, we need communities with capacities to socially include all its members. So now we're saying, in this model, everybody's responsibility is to change. In this model, we're saying the provider has to change. In this model, we're realigning relationships of people who are connected to one another around the person. In this one, we're saying everybody's involved. So part of your confusion is you're told by the CMS guidelines to transform the community, which is really not your responsibility. Only a piece of your, you only have a piece in that play. It's really the whole community. That's why it feels overwhelming. But they're sort of operating under two models, I think. So here's another way of looking at it. Depends on what we're listening to when we're working with somebody with disabilities. back in the institutional model, I hear you saying, cure me, you're a patient. In the managed care model, we're saying, we're listening to the voice of the consumer, satisfying them. We're in competition here, so we want to make sure we're connecting with people. When we're in the integrative model, we're saying, the person is saying, listen to me, I'm a person. And when we're in the citizenship model, we hear, I'm a citizen, include me, I've got rights. Now, we know that these are aspects of our humanness, all of them. But unfortunately, as a provider or a system, we narrow the vision down by only listening to a piece of that voice. We're hoping that these things become more dominant voices. These become secondary voices. These are the first thing we listen to. These become secondary. But you notice how the trajectory gets larger. We see a broader picture, more whole picture, or we hear bigger messages. Community. This kind of the example that they have thing. So in the institutional model, we experience community through a window. If I'm a person with disability, I see it out there. If I'm in the managed care model or the current model, I got it programmed to be experiencing the community. I got to get scheduled. If I am in the integrative model, it is through my relationship I get connected. Right? Through my family members, through my friends, through the employer that I have. And of course, this is where we experience it as active citizens, typically. So you could sort of, if you were to divide up the 125 people supported in the DD system in New York State, where would you put, how many people would be here, how many people would be here, and so forth. And that would give you a sense of where we are as a New York State. Now there are probably another 125 out there that are not supported through the OPWDD system. We don't even know what's going on, because they're with their families. But with us, where would we place it? Because we are trying to move the agenda forward. Now there's the you again, and this is sort of almost too complex to bring out there. I found and discovered, along with a bunch of other people, of course I'm not the only one, that there were a bunch of people at MIT, Organizational School of Learning over in Boston, that were really looking at social change on a variety of different levels, tackling big societal problems, like climate, like food, and so forth, water. Peter Senge was the name of one of them, talked about the learning organization. New guy, Otto Schwarmer, relatively new, German, came over here, not from Jersey, but from Germany. And he got involved in his postdoctoral work in innovation. And he went around the world after a number of people had been identified as being innovators in their field, hundreds of people. And he boiled down what they had to say about their innovation process. And this is what he saw, that in order for innovation to occur, you sort of have to disrupt your current ways of looking at things. That's sort of a skill set that's really hard to wrap your head around. You had to stop downloading typical ways of responding to things. And by that I mean, it could be as simple as like, what route do you go to work with every day? So, I'll give you an example. Every day I found the most efficient route to go to work. Now it gets kind of boring and annoying, but I think that's the best way to go to work. And one day my car needed service, and one of my fellow workers, you'll see him, ex-worker now, Chris Uzo, says, it picks me up at the garage and starts going the wrong way. Can you imagine? I'm like, what the heck do you think you're doing? I mean, really, don't you get pissed off when somebody tells you another way to go to work? And he's going down country roads, places I'd never been to in Rensselaer County. Jesus. Finally we get to work. 2 minutes past my efficiency. But I had a whole different experience. I'm like, Chris, I'm like really relaxed. I mean, we avoided the lights. We saw the countryside. He goes, yeah, I take different routes every day. And I'm thinking, this is what, I mean, even the simplest things, we don't disrupt anything. We move towards normalization. And so in order to do something new, in order to get to that, I think, good form of service and support around a person with disability, we have to disrupt what we're doing now in terms of our headset. In order to move into a place where we can see something different and new. And if you were part of the Learning Institute, and some of you will be going on learning journeys, and you'll be listening to different people talking about their experiences. And this is the next level, is really opening your mind up to, oh, there's another perspective out there. But then at some point you got to get not only hear the other perspective, but you got to move into it. You got to actually feel it. So that's very important, that empathetic response. And then you got to kind of let it percolate for a while. I don't know about you. I developed a capacity over the years because I realized I wasn't being very effectual. It's not knee-jerking to solutions around complex problems. That I was able to sort of, listen to people, think about it, even meditate on it. And all of a sudden, like 2-3 weeks later, this impossible problem, I'm like taking a shower, an idea pops into my head, a vision about next steps. I don't know if that has ever happened to you. That's what they're talking about at the bottom of the U. And usually it connects to something that's really important to you, a high principle. And it lodges you in that complex problem set a little bit better because you're operating under something higher purpose. And then you say, well, now I'm willing to try and experiment against that idea. And that's what this U process is. It moves you, out of your typical way of looking at things, getting the hero's journey, into a different perspective, into a thought pattern that's more meditative, and then a crystallization of a thought about what's possible, and then trying it out, practically speaking. This, I think, is what I would refer to as an adaptive move instead of developing a strategic plan, because we don't know what's going to work with wicked problems. And getting people, including in the community, is a tough challenge. So this is a quilt developed by Beth Mount, as one of the founders or lead people in person-centered planning, one of the people that are horribly anxious about how they're using person-centered planning and the regs and so forth, because of seconding her, her original thought about how it sits separately from the system. But she's a quiltist as well, or a fiber artist, or mixed media, however you want to call it. And this particular thing is almost as big as this whole thing here. It's just magnificent. And what she did was, in this particular quilt, she's done many, and usually they're thematically around how change is happening in the community for people with developmental disabilities. This particular one is Keys to Life. The Keys to Life quilt is about the 10 individualized support situations at the Arc of Rensselaer County. So these little boxes here, each a particular scenario of a particular individual. And this sort of depicts our place, home, with our Henrietta Meissner founder views up here. So I'm going to lead you through a few stories, hopefully quickly, because I know we're getting to the end. This is Richard. Richard's from Rome Developmental Center. He's okay with being up there. He likes that I talk about him. Rich was a tough dude. He came from Rome Developmental Center as an enforcer. I don't know how many people know about those stories, but enforcers were the people that the staff used in the institution to lay hands on the people that they felt were out of control. So I go, Rich, take care of that person over there. And that way, the support person didn't get in trouble. And so Rich was carrying out the duty. So Rich, in the transition, had some tough times. Still does, to a certain extent. because he valued that role in the institution. He was an enforcer, he was a tough guy. So he goes into a community locally. We have big problems with group homes. I don't have time to tell you all the stories, but believe me, very strong. Richard, can you help me with the refrigerator? And he'd get there before you would and pick it up and move it himself. He likes motorcycles. His apartment was near the eastern chapter of the Hells Angels. Hells Angels is still there in Troy. He was wearing a Hells Angels t-shirt without their permission. They confronted him, he beat the crap out of them. So Richard then had new friends. So you can imagine he was in a tough neighborhood. We've had issues recently in that neighborhood, lots of shootings and so forth. So this is not an easy journey. It's always, what do you do next with Richard? It's not like we've figured it out. But I love Richard, and he was over my house moving wood at one point, way back in the day when my daughter was young, maybe 4 years old. And I invited Rich to come in for dinner, and my daughter was acting obnoxious for some reason or another. I was 4 years old, do good times. And he turned to me and said, "Do you want me to take care of it?" So as tempting as that was, I said, "No, Richard, that probably wouldn't work." So Richard now, he's had his own business. We support him in the community, had his own place, and it's been quite the journey with him. But I would say that Richard is Richard. He's not a client of the system. That's the quilt part for him. He loves motorcycles. He doesn't drive them, but he does love them. So, we learned about him, we learned about the neighborhood. We had to change him a few times because the neighborhood was getting really tough, and he would interact with it. He doesn't take anybody's crap, so he would get in trouble, and he'd get in trouble with the law, and so forth and so on. This has never stopped. We continue the journey with him. So this whole idea of designing personal supports in this adaptive way, meaning life circumstance changes, especially with a guy like Richard. He's vulnerable in that he does have a hell of a temper. He's very strong and has minimal impulse control when he's angry. And we want to keep him independent. So have fun with that, folks. But we're still there. We're still with him. It's been 37 years I've known him. So it's like changing, doing things differently, like a legacy service, but doing it like with Richard's, like changing horses in midstream. You see, this guy didn't do so well in the coffin for trying to do that. So it's not easy stuff. So this idea that we keep getting the word transformation out there, means and I always get confused by it because the way the system is defining it and forcing us into sort of linear planning methods like goals and objectives and so forth, and not into innovation pathways, says something about the way they think about change, but are mislabeling it. And one of the metaphors that I like using is, I'm a hiker. I have a place up in the Adirondacks. My parents were fortunate enough to get an old farmhouse back in the 50s. I want to say that because I am an executive. I don't want to sound like I'm rich. This was for $3,000. My father had got money, not from being from New Jersey, but from being a Jew from Germany, an expatriate. So he bought the house for $3 grand. I have it now with my wife. And I love hiking in the Adirondacks. I love the trails. I love the bushwhacking experiences, meaning just going off into the woods with a compass and a map, no trails. Those experiences are different. The map trails, which have a trail map and a guidebook and markers, and going into the woods. Very different experience. So I liken that to a developmental change. You have a starting point, you have a marked trail, and you have a destination. You consult a book, somebody's been there before, you know how to get there. A linear, right? Transactional or transitional change is when the old trail doesn't work anymore, and you got to reroute it. Like in Eileen, the big hurricane that happened, destroyed a lot of trails. They had to go around some avalanches and so forth, rock slides, and new trail. But same destination, marked in the book. Managed care, that's what I think that is. When you're working on the community guidelines, you're working on the inspirational work, you're talking about transformational change, which requires these adaptive moves. So the map isn't the territory. So you look at the map and you go, there's a straight line, and you get there and there's like loaded, and there's like a bear, there's like a cliff that you can't see on the map, and you've got to reorient and then find your way back. And it's constant adjustment, and it makes sense to find a vantage point so you see where you've been, where you're going possibly, but this takes constant adjustment. I think that's our world now. That's how we confront our world now. Now I'm running out of time, so you might have to go to my next session, which I do have some slides. There's some levels of responding to change. But I'm going to rifle through here. This I'm going to probably talk about in the afternoon session, so I won't do that now. And I'll talk about them later on as well. But I want to get you out on time. It's getting like really hot in here. And so thank you for listening up to this point.